So I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and it inspired me to make this video because he's not someone that is typically into that much rock or metal, or if he is, he doesn't usually know much about it, and he was asking me for some recommendations, and so I have just been giving him a ton of different metal recommendations, and during our conversations throughout the days, he mentioned that he doesn't usually like Screamo music. He doesn't like Screamo vocals, and I feel like one of the biggest no-nos when it comes to a metalhead is calling it all Screamo, and I've mentioned before that that is a stigma, that is a cliche, that is a stereotype, and a pretty stupid one at that. But it also got me thinking, I don't think I've necessarily ever just seen a video that is going over what is the difference between metal music and Screamo music for a beginner or for someone that maybe isn't that well versed in one or the other or both. So instead of just telling a friend, oh, metal isn't Screamo, show them this video. So Screamo music was derived from emo. It is a very confrontational, very highly confessional genre that is denoted from its emotion, and emo as a whole was always designed to evoke emotion. It is literally in the name. It was very dark and it was brooding, but up until the point that Screamo kind of came around, most of the time it wasn't very raw, and the most you could get was adjacent stuff like post-hardcore. And Screamo music took a lot of hints from hardcore punk and post-hardcore, which are different genres that are not metal either, whereas emo music was more rock-inspired and indie-inspired, specifically like garage rock and indie rock-inspired, depending on what genre you are talking about, and having different scenes like the Midwest emo scene, which were based more around melody and hyper-harmonious instrumentation and arpeggios from a guitar standpoint, more spoken word passages, being more kind of in your face and being sort of all of that emotion turned up to 11. Screamo music took all of the emotion of just plain emo music, hopped that up on steroids, and mixed it with the aggression of hardcore punk and post-hardcore music, which hardcore punk and specifically post-hardcore were massively influential to both emo and Screamo. One of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people getting into metal music for the first time, and I personally can understand where they're coming from, is considering all metal vocals to be Screamo music, but Screamo is its own genre, and most of its stylistic roots came about in like the mid to late 90s, although there are some demos and EPs from the late 80s going into the early 90s that really did start it up. You had projects like Page 99, Orchid, Seisha are all early examples of Screamo, and in the 2000s you had some more projects, one of the biggest and one of my favorite Screamo projects being Circle Takes the Square, but the 2000s redefined emo and Screamo in many ways. Most people will know that in the 2000s you had a lot of emo bands really take over the mainstream. You had the My Chemical Romances, the Fall Out Boys, the Panic at the Discos, the Paramores, and these were all massive emo bands, and even projects like Linkin Park and Evanescence took some emo angst. But there was going to be a whole new host of emo and Screamo adjacent bands that would bleed into the mainstream once there was the scene metalcore era, and anyone that was aware of the MySpace scene era should know that metalcore and Screamo and emo were very big and pretty much instrumental to the culture of the look, the fringe haircuts and the skinny jeans and the ripped band t-shirts and cutting yourself. You had a lot of adjacent bands in the late 2000s and 2010s build up more of a repertoire, the Pierce the Veil, Sleeping with Sirens, Escape the Fates, Falling in Reverse, but you also had some bands that were more so Screamo than anything else, and they took a lot of that 90s aggression and confessionalism of 90s Screamo, but made it a little more diluted, a little more commercially viable. You had your Hawthorne Heights as well as your Under Oaths, two amazing bands, might I add. And if you really want to split hairs, there were a lot of other bands that took some Screamo in their metalcore music, Attack Attack, Inner Shikari, a lot of the early electronicore bands, and even early Asking Alexandria and Bring Me the Horizon had some Screamo tendencies, although those were not like true blue. And if you want a band that isn't Screamo but takes a lot of the vocals from Screamo, See You Space Cowboy or Dance Gavin Dance employ a lot of Screamo vocals. Screamo also kind of overlaps a lot with veganism, anarchism. Most Screamo artists are pretty left-leaning, heavily critical about rights, and are most of the time some of the most chill and welcoming, accepting people. You have overlap with skate culture, and the biggest thing about Screamo that definitely does overlap with metal but not necessarily as much is it is very much based in the underground and the DIY, and if you look up any like Screamo show, it does feel like a different beast compared to a lot of different like metal genres. While metal definitely has its moments in a mosh pit, most of the time you aren't going to get the same thing you get at a Screamo show of people literally flying off stage, kicking people in the face, hardcore dancing, crowd killing, and it's not necessarily meant to be a negative thing, it is just part of the culture. And that's kind of the diverging point when you bring in metal is a lot more diverse, it is a lot more versatile, and I think Screamo and emo tend to be pretty one-dimensional, a little one-note, and that's coming from someone that adopts most of Screamo and emo's beliefs compared to metalhead beliefs. I very much love that sort of punk DIY aesthetic. That has always been something that's been very close to home for me and something that I agree a lot with culturally. But metal has something for like everyone, which is wonderful. I fucking love metal, but it definitely does have a lot of different influences. But you saw Screamo have so much influence on a lot of metalcore bands and even other genres like black metal bands. Death Heaven takes a lot of Screamo vocals and puts them into their music, specifically around like the Sunbather and New Bermuda era. And if you're wanting like more of kind of a quote-unquote modern take on Screamo, Loma Prieta makes some fantastic Screamo music, and like I said, a lot of See You Space Cowboy nowadays do that. And there are plenty of metalcore bands that are more so on the hardcore punk Screamo side. A lot of early Beartooth had those Screamo vocals, and that kind of is the diverging point when it comes to Screamo vocals. They sound more shrill, they sound more brittle, they sound very skeletal, high in the throat, they usually don't have much technique done to them, they usually don't try to like preserve their voice. A lot of Screamo vocalists tend to fuck themselves up, but once again, it is part of their culture, it's part of just blowing your voice out for a show, sitting on the fucking ground with blood all over the place. That is like something that means something to them. A lot of times Screamo gets lauded for how shitty it is sometimes, and I know that can be hard to understand, but from a live standpoint, if you fuck up a note, or your voice cracks, or you blow out your voice, or maybe a riff is messed up, sort of that DIY aesthetic, that is lauded, that is absolutely praised, that is considered like a good thing. You are being true to the culture. Screamo isn't necessarily about fries, or gutturals, or deep growls. It can be anything, and Screamo is oftentimes going to be very fast, very frantic, but it is also going to have these expansive interludes where it is very pretty and it is very sorrowful. It has that sadness built in, and there were a lot of other offshoots of Screamo music that had a lot of influences from other genres, and it just kind of comes down to how rhythmatically complex you are and how dissonant you are. A lot of Screamo tends to rely on feedback. You also get very short songs a lot of times with very long titles. It kind of has this aesthetic of being very philosophical and trying to make a statement, similarly to how grindcore albums and songs have very long titles and are very short. Screamo's the same way. It's not really uncommon for a Screamo project to be very short, to not even clock in like 20 minutes. It can be 10-15 minutes, and even like Daughter's first album was a little bit Screamo inspired in some capacity. So Screamo and emo music is kind of all over the place, but the big difference between metal is it isn't necessarily as much of like a tight-knit brother and sisterhood. While metal is very tight-knit, I feel like Screamo kind of has us beat in terms of they definitely flock together, whereas metalheads are very diverse. And I'm not necessarily saying that Screamo isn't diverse or that there aren't a lot of people with diverging opinions. Of course there are, but metal just tends to be a little less insulated than Screamo and emo culturally, and you also get a lot more gatekeeping, a lot more purism, a lot more assholes. I feel like I've never just had a fight or an argument with a Screamo or emo fan, and I think it's just that welcoming aura that a lot of them have, because kind of similar to how metal was supposed to be to begin with, a lot of emo and Screamo fans are outcasts, black sheeps of society. They didn't really fit in anywhere, and they take pride in that. They wear that as a badge of honor. They don't want to fit in with anything. They want to be shunned. Poor choice of words. I don't think anyone just wants to be fucked over or traumatized, but they don't necessarily look at it as a bad thing because it brought them closer to the community that they had, and that's something a lot of metalheads can also relate to, but it is a little bit different. And then that also goes hand in hand with like the bajillion metal subgenres and genres, many of which take influence from Screamo Screamo and emo music, there definitely are a lot of metal projects that have taken influence from those genres or offshoots of those genres, because in many ways a lot of the biggest metal subgenres came around contemporarily with the stylistic roots of Screamo and post-hardcore music as well as hardcore punk. And metal vocals are very diverse. Not all metal has to have screamed vocals, and while you can have Screamo vocals in metal, not all metal vocals are Screamo. There are plenty of bands that take influence from Screamo vocals and puts that into their music, but there are a vast array of different metal vocal techniques that many vocalists employ. This was a really fun video to make. I enjoyed it a lot, and I hope you guys did too. You can let me know down in the comment section below your opinions of it. If you agree or disagree, you can let me know, and also any other points that you'd like to add to this, and your opinions of Screamo music and emo music. I'm assuming all of y'all are metalheads, so what are your opinions of that? You can let me know down in the comment section below as well. Be sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to join the review family today, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. You know who it is, my name is Jay Morris, and I'm signing off saying farewell.